This is Let's Talk Big, the Big Read with Jane Berger and Jen Hazel. The Owens Community College Campus Read is taking place now and throughout the semester, with the goal of bringing awareness of different perspectives through books. The Campus Read book is How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones, and tells the story of how each of us creates a place for ourselves in this world. Here to share their insight from the book is Owens Community College Director of Library Services, Jane Berger, and Professor of English, Jennifer Hazel.
We're here to talk big. I'm Jen Hazel. I have with me Jane Berger. And as promised, we have the Saeed Jones. We're going to dive right in.
What advice would you give to young writers? You know, there's so many who just think that they have that perfect story in them. And maybe they do. Who is it for us to say? Do you have any advice that you could give them to young writers?
Keep a notebook or, a note file on your phone. Write all your ideas down. Even if it's just a title or a word you keep thinking about, like no matter how outlandish might be like an idea for a movie, you have to write all of your ideas down because you never know how they'll pay off. And it's always great to be able to return to them. And sometimes I've had words or phrases or turns of phrases that I've just kind of been constantly writing down for years. And then I finally get to work it into a book. And so I always encourage people to do that. And then read as much as you can. I think, for poets, I try to encourage poets to read 3 poems by other people for every 1 poem you write, because you want to get a better understanding of the world. Yeah.
That's great advice.
So you mentioned reading. Who do you read, Saeed?
Oh, my gosh. Well, right now, so there's a series of books called The Last Interview. And it's a series of books where after a famous public figure has died, some recent, some later, basically they publish like the first interview they did that's on record, and then their last interview, and then in between it's like significant interviews over the course of their lives. And so right now I'm reading The Last Interview book with Billie Holiday. And that's been really interesting. And I'm also simultaneously reading The Last Interview with Toni Morrison. I think of myself a bit as a Toni Morrison file.
Oh my gosh, me too.
I think I own it's like I have everything by her. Still, I'm always learning something. And then Billie Holiday is a figure I know a bit well. I've done some research, but it's been incredible learning more about her. And then just her voice in conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
Saeed, the story you tell in the memoir is yours, but it resonates with many. And we talked in the last interview about the collective us. Will we ever see a part 2? Not that we ever want you ever to experience anything like that again, but will we ever see a part 2?
I think, my next book, which actually comes out this fall, is a poetry collection titled Alive at the End of the World. I think it is a bit like a part 2. It's like the work, you just kind of keep your head down and you keep working, and then you don't necessarily see all the connections until later. But, it's interesting. It's like how we fight for our lives. It's like, okay, this is how. And then here we are. We're like, okay, we're alive at the end of the world. But yeah, as I wrote it, I wanted to write poems about this moment, this sense of ongoing apocalypse, the repetition of all these kind of calamities. But within that, it's also about what I call the afterlife of grief. May of 2021 was the 10-year anniversary of my mother passing away. And so I was really struck that in the middle of the pandemic, all of this loss, all of this grief and upheaval that we were all going through together, I was also reckoning with that kind of long-term grief and mourning that I've been going through. And so I was both writing about the collective experience, but also what it means to be reckoning with these feelings later. And to my surprise, my mom, my grandmother, there's even a reference or two to my Uncle Alfred who appears in the memoir. Yeah, you get shades of them. There's even, a poem where I'm talking about the actress Cicely Tyson, who passed away a few years ago. And I think the title is, after listening to a snippet of Cicely Tyson sing, I begin to wonder if I was a good grandson. So it's almost like a lot of echoes and I guess callback to significant moments in the memoir.
I was going to ask you about that, and then you went into it, because I was like, that's an ominous title. Like, what are we going to be hearing about? That's awesome.
Well, I have a question that's not really related to writing or anything. If you could hang out with anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why? Maybe it's Toni Morrison.
That's interesting. I mean, I always tell people, be wary of meeting your legends. You might get your feelings hurt. I got to meet her once at a book signing, and I was so nervous I could barely speak. Today, maybe Andre Leon Talley. Andre Leon Talley was a really iconic fashion editor. He worked at Vogue with Anna Wintour for a long time, and he was a Black gay man. He just passed away a couple of months ago, and he's been on my mind. And I just think he's one of those people where, like, right at the end of his life, the culture started to kind of appreciate a lot of the work he did, but it was, like, belated. He was, like, underpaid. He was underappreciated. You know, the film The Devil Wears Prada, the character Stanley Tucci, it's actually played by Stanley Tucci. It's based on Andre Leon Talley. But you wouldn't know that. Right.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, it's
because
not
we
even
don't...
a Black gay man. And so, you know, it's just really interesting. And I think it would have been lovely to talk with him, dead or alive, about how he felt about all of that. Because I'm interested in cultural figures. I was thinking of Luther Vandross this morning. Cultural figures who, like, give us a lot. They contribute to the culture. But you kind of wonder, like, was it returns in time?
Saeed, your voice is an important one in what I personally call, as an English professor, redefining the canon of literature. What can we expect to see in the future for Saeed Jones? I personally can't get enough of what you have to say. So just, you know, if you could give me like 5 minutes on what you're working on, what you're doing, what you keep doing, because we're here.
Yeah. So when the poetry collection, Life at the End of the World, comes out in September, I'm so excited to share that with people. And then kind of on the daily, if you want to hear more about my process or read more about my process, I have my newsletter, my Substack, and it's called Work in Progress, because I believe life itself is a creative process, and it's saeedjones.substack.com. And that's been really fun to kind of demystify the behind-the-scenes part of the creative life. And I don't know, we're still finalizing details, but I'm working with 2 really brilliant friends, and we're going to launch a podcast soon to get to talk about, you know, a lot of things that have come up during this conversation, you know, news and culture and kind of the intersection. There's just a lot going on, and I feel like it's a time when I think people are really searching for opportunities to be able to process what's happening to us, what's going on. It just feels really loud. And so, yeah. And then I don't know. I mean, in terms of the next major book project, I think I'm in a phase of trying to listen and research. But I can tell you, I'm spending a lot of time looking at our history in our country and finding opportunities perhaps to resurrect details or moments in history, particularly involving Black queer people, that have been perhaps overlooked.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I really am a groupie. I get your newsletter and I follow you on all the socials. It's a real treat to...
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So anyone else, it's a real treat. You should actually get there and listen to what Saeed has today. It's a nice little break in my day. You have so much to say, and that's super important. We thank you so much for being here today, for us to be able to talk with you and to see you. If you're listening to this before Saeed takes the stage, before, or as a nice cap up, after, if you're listening to it afterwards, because it airs at 7 and 11 and 7 and 11, and you'll be on stage at 10 and 1:30. So somewhere in between there, and then it'll play the following week too. So for behalf of myself, Jane Berger, and Saeed Jones, the Saeed Jones. I'm putting a "the" in front of it like the Ohio State University, because that's how I feel, Saeed.
Exactly.
So you can tell everyone
I
that.
up on that. I love it.
So you can tell everyone else that. Please check us out for more information on Saeed on our website, owens.edu/humanities/big-read. And that'll do it for us today. Keep talking big, everyone.
Join us again for Let's Talk Big, the Big Read with Jane Berger and Jen Hazel.